Absolute Flash, issue 11, Jeff Lemire writing with Nick Robles on the art. So, this is Wally inside the still point, and it turns out that Barry and our Salic-looking friend, who has a name that rhymes with Salic, might I add.
You can't tell me that scientist is not from the same planet.
Oh, he is. He absolutely is. They would not call him Balak or whatever the name was. If he wasn't meant to be from the same planet. He absolutely is. Which is cool. That's a fine little way to introduce that part of the corner of the world or the universe. So basically, Barry's stuck in here. He's part of the Red, right? Which, that's what they're calling it here. Now, I don't think this is, at least until I read something specific that suggests it, every time he says the Red in here, I don't think it has anything to do with what we call the Red in the main universe. I think the Red here is effectively the Speed Force.
Yes. And I think that it's curious that it is red because it's also the same color of the Omega Sanction, right? With Darkseid and what we know about the Absolute Universe, right? Because anytime I think of the Flash, I think of the yellow burst, not the red. So yeah, for all intents and purposes, this seems like a version of the Speed Force.
Yeah. So Barry explains this. He explains that Thawne and Garrick were different to them. They didn't just die and become these like specters that are stuck in here. And Wally as well is not a specter. He can go back. In fact, he needs to go back. And the big thing they get to is basically that Thawne was drawn to this like well that's in here. Like something called out to him and he got tempted and went in. And as we see later, it turned him into this giant kind of like demon, this like Speed Force demon, and that's what comes out to the point where when Thawne kind of like materializes in the real world, because we saw him starting to come out at the end of the last issue, when he kind of takes form in this, very quickly even his granddaughter's like, oh shit, I've made a huge mistake, he's just a big evil monster, we have to send him back right now.
She immediately was the Job meme.
So the rogues sort of come darting in and they're helping try to like close him back into the portal. Trickster, who betrayed everyone else, is kind of helping. I mean, they're not necessarily working together, but they're kind of all working towards the same goal. And then ultimately, Wally's big comeback moments at the end when it's like he saves, I think it's Captain Cold, or no, it's Golden Glider at the very end. She's getting pulled by Thawne, and Wally speeds out, and that's your big cliffhanger. So yeah, I mean that's the basic like bullet points of the issue, but obviously we spend some time with there's a lot of like Barry talking to Wally and explaining stuff.
Yeah, the idea to make Thawne a literal speed demon, I love Lemire for, right? Because there's always this talk about how Thawne was, one of the most twisted villains because he actually succeeded in killing Iris at one point, right? And there's a whole arc in the Flash in the 80s for that. And then when Johns was writing and, Thawne goes back and kills Barry's mom, and there's all the stuff that he was, this very evil being. So for Lemire to make him look like that, right? Who looked like he's from the pits of hell, and everybody, including the villain of the book, is like, oh, this is a bad idea, we got to put him back. Like that was a good exchange.
For me, that's the part that made it interesting, was that Eleanor Thawne was immediately like, oh shit, yeah, this isn't good, we need to send him back. Because I think just him being monstrous looking is actually not that like new anymore. Not specifically for Thawne or the Flash, but just in general, the Absolute Universe. I feel like everything's a more monstrous version of, and even going all the way back to the Ultimate Universe in Marvel, the first big villain, Green Goblin, he's a literal big demonic looking monster now. So it almost feels like the like the most obvious thing they do with these alternate universes. They just do, we'll do a literal monster this time. Killer Croc is just a giant literal, croc monster now. So that alone, I don't think was that interesting. I think the fact that immediately even the people who were trying to bring him out were like, you know what, actually, we've changed our minds. He's just a demon now. And it does also raise the question of like, okay, what turned him into that? Because he didn't just become that because he went in there. He became that because he was tempted into this hole, this well, and something was in there that turned him into this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that goes back to the mythology. A lot of stuff with mythology in the Absolute books this week. Just this whole idea that like this darkness that calls out to you, right? The abyss. When you start the abyss stares back at you. And he chose to go into that abyss, right? So he was willing to embrace that darkness in a way that where you see Garrick's body there. Garrick's body's kind of leaning close to it, but he didn't go in, you know? And so, yeah, just in the grand scheme of storytelling, like that person that goes into the dark and then embraces it, he's going to come out as a monster. And here, and just the way that he's like yelling only one, it also made me think of Highlander and the Kurgan, right? And the whole absolute power corrupts absolutely aspect of it. But yeah, I love how this book has shaped into its own. Because when it started, we were always talking about how it's kind of lagging behind some of the other ones. But especially after this issue, I am much more like as if I'm not interested in Flash already. This one jumped a couple places because the choices that Lemire's made here with the Speed Force and whatnot. Like, I'm very curious to see where a lot of this goes and ends up and how it plays out. Because Thawne is still the bad guy that's working with everybody, right? With the Green Lantern guy. What am I drawing a blank on his name? Hector Hammond. And, you know, that whole group there. But if she's even seeing this and being like, oh, okay, no, this is bad. It puts things into perspective.
Yeah, and I'm definitely enjoying this book the more it's went along. I will say, reading this, like, I think the stuff in the still point is kind of the least interesting part in a lot of ways. Like, I like the whole thing about, okay, what turned Thawne into this thing. But for me, the more finished pages in the book were outside with the rogues and, like, Captain Cold, like, you know, running his team and saying, let's go do this and find the others that we want to save. And, like, I almost feel like the book has done a really good job of building up the rogues at this point and kind of, like, just the mythology around Eleanor and the lab. I think they're all more interesting than Wally is so far in this book. I think Wally right now in this book is the kind of the weak element, who is not a lost cause by any means. I think a couple of, you know, good issues that really turn him around and make him feel like he's making some big decisions that feel earned, or whatever it may be. I think that he could easily rise up with some good storytelling yet to go above or match everything else. But I think right now, Wally is probably the least interesting thing in Absolute Flash, which isn't necessarily like a deal breaker by any means, but I do think that's why this is still the weakest Absolute book versus the other, you know, 5.
And I get that, but I feel like Lemire's treating it like a ensemble book right now, and like Flash is greater than just the one hero. And he's taking advantage of Wally's, you know, supporting cast and putting them all to good use. And that was really apparent here because, like, we get a lot. Everyone kind of gets a moment in this one, you know, whether it was Trickster putting all the stuff together, that even though she betrayed the rogues, right, she's the one that's able to get that door back open, you know, over time. And then Glider, you know, almost willing to sacrifice herself, you know, to go and do things. And yeah, so I appreciate Lemire for taking that different approach, and it paid off here finally.
Yeah, I'm just like, I enjoyed the issue. I've been enjoying it more with these last few, certainly. But it is still the weakest Absolute book, and I think this is the issue that made me realize that Wally's the weakest or the least interesting thing in the book.
Yeah.
And there's a time where that could change, and it absolutely could get there. And if it doesn't, then that's maybe okay, as long as all these other characters keep being a part of the book. But right now, I do think he's the weakest part, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops as time goes on. So yeah, I'm not ready to just sort of give Lemire praise. Perhaps there's still some things to iron out, but no, there's some interesting stuff in this one for sure. So
yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, Matt, what are you giving Absolute Flash?
Cool. I'm giving this an 8.5.
I'm going 7.5. I don't think I want to quite call it great, because I do think
Look at you.
it's yeah. So yeah, 7.5 for me on this one.